For a man with a cold mind and a righteous heart, revenge is but the satisfaction of honor. His punishing hand is devoid of unnecessary cruelty, and his actions are inspired by justice. The one whose soul is easily inflamed by an accidental spark seeks nothing more than to appease his own emotions with reckless rage. But what does revenge look like for someone who, having been born all his life with a heart of fire, is forced to limit his temper for the good of others? The hero of today's story is Roboute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, superior to all his brothers in intellect and strategy. Only his own intemperance could bring him down. By a cruel fate, the 20 kidnapped sons of the Emperor were scattered across the galaxy. The planets that became the homeworlds of the Primarchs gave some of them a life full of heroic accomplishments, while the others were harshly treated. Guilliman had suffered both. Incubation capsule number 13 crossed the galaxy and landed in the southern region of the eastern edge. The planet Macragge is a dangerous but not ruthless world, much of which is covered by a cold, rocky highlands, virtually devoid of life. However, a small Primarch was lucky enough to fall into a place near where the local aristocracy hunted. Civilization on Macragge was born during the dark age of technology, successfully surviving the age of strife and maintaining an orderly society. The inhabitants of the planet owned several obsolete ships that could make warp travels when times were favorable, as well as building new sublight frigates. The world community also knew about the existence of other systems inhabited by humans and maintained communication with neighboring civilizations. Therefore, when the hunters discovered the capsule with the perfect child, they immediately realized that it was created using high technology in another developed world. The amazing baby, surrounded by a shining halo of power, was delivered to one of the two consuls who ruled the most powerful region of Macragge at that time. The ruler's name was Connor Guilliman. He adopted the child and gave him the noble name of Roboute. Raised in an atmosphere of love and surrounded by parental attention and care, the Primarch would consider Connor his true father even after 10,000 years. Roboute grew at an incredible rate for an ordinary child and impressed those around him with his physical strength and shrewd mind. By the time he was 10 years old on Macragge, Roboute had learned everything that the wisest people on the planet could teach him. He impressed his teachers with his extraordinary grasp of history and philosophy, his ability to organize scraps of information and draw accurate conclusions from scant data, and his impeccable memory retained even information he had only glimpsed. But his greatest achievements were in the study of the art of war, which was considered one of the most paramount sciences on the planet. Absolutely confident in his son's abilities, Connor Guilliman sent him to pacify the remote northern lands of the planet called Imperium. These were cold territories inhabited by barbarians whose factions fought incessantly with each other, as well as attacking more civilized regions. The population was a mixture of ferocious bandits and cold-blooded mercenaries, willing to commit any crime for money. Roboute had conducted a flawless military campaign, gaining not only territory but also the respect of the harsh northern barbarians. However, he was unable to share the joy of his first triumph with his father. Returning to the capital Macragge Civitas, Roboute found his hometown engulfed in rebellion. Galen, the second consul of the state, took advantage of the absence of the Primarch and a large portion of the troops to launch a military coup against Connor. Such treachery was not unique in the history of the world, but in this particular case took the first consul by surprise. Conspiring with the wealthiest members of the local nobility, Galen attempted a complete seizure of power. The second ruler was jealous of Connor Guilliman's political influence and popularity, and was also afraid of his supernaturally gifted son, who was growing stronger by the day. The coup was supported by part of the aristocracy, who hoped to preserve the established order, in which immense wealth grew from the slave labor of powerless workers. Because of Connor's reforms, the old order of things was being eradicated and was irrevocably gone. Progressive industrialists supported the elder Guilliman in his efforts to change the balance of power by giving workers more rights and improving their living conditions. Such innovations weakened the position of the aristocracy, which, among other things, was obliged to invest in rebuilding the decaying state infrastructure. All this made Conor Guilliman the greatest ruler in the eyes of the common people, while at the same time turning most of the wealthiest aristocrats, except for the wisest, against him. As he approached the city, Roboute, elated by his victory, saw the capital smoking in anarchic madness and crowds of frightened people fleeing their homes. The accounts of all the refugees spoke of one thing. A private military detachment of Second Consul Galen had attacked the Senate while it was in session, and marginalized hordes of brigands had set fire to and looted the city. Barely hearing of the incident, the enraged Primarch rushed to the Senate building, leaving his soldiers to deal with the rioters. With his exceptional strategic skills, Roboute could calculate the favorable outcome of any battle. However, this did not mean that he always stuck to his plans. Roboute's hot heart sometimes pushed him to rash actions. Going into the heart of battle to save his father was the first time he went against his plans. Though it was Conor who often told his son, "You must control your emotions, you are superior to any man in every way, including self-control, curb your feelings or you will die." So, both in the case of the neighborhood riot and several other future battles, Roboute was losing control. Avenging son, he made his way to the center of the city alone, slaying whole gangs of rebels that appeared in his way, but he was too late. The bullet-riddled, charred Senate building had been destroyed, and by the time the Primarch appeared, it was of no interest even to the marauders. Among the ruins, deep beneath the piles of rubble, Roboute Guilliman found his dying father. The wounded consul had led the defense of the besieged Senate for 3 days and might have been able to hold out had Roboute arrived a little sooner. Upon seeing his favorite son, Conor found the strength to tell of Galen's treachery and point out the instigators of the crime against the state. An enraged Roboute turned on all those involved in the rebellion. Joining his troops with groups of aggrieved citizens, he crushed the mercenary armies and decorated the city with a multitude of gallows with the bodies of noblemen who had supported the rebellion. All the instigators of the riots, including the second consul, were sentenced to public execution. Order returned to the capital and its surrounding lands. Grateful citizens lined up outside the ruined Senate building to greet their savior. Macraig no longer wanted to live under 2 consuls. That day, to a thunder of applause, Roboute Guilliman took up the mantle of the all-powerful and only ruler for the first time. All the rebels were sentenced to hard labor. The criminals had to rebuild by hand, stone by stone, the city they had destroyed. The impossible task was more agonizing than death on the gallows, and yet death inevitably caught up with them. Thanks to the incredible abilities of the wise Primarch, the planet became a meritocracy, a utopian regime possible only on Macraig. In this ideal society, the hard-working and honest prospered in high office. Loyal soldiers were given rights they had never dreamed of before. Violators of order were met with impartial but inevitable punishment. Economic stagnation and inequality disappeared. Advanced technology became available to everyone. The army evolved into a powerful and superbly equipped military force. The self-sufficient and advanced planet Macraig successfully participated in trade with several systems. Under the unchallenged rule of Roboute Guilliman, society rose to the heights of its prosperity. Back when the Primarch was at war with the Illyrians in the Northern Territories, the Emperor, who found himself on the planet Espandor, heard enthusiastic tales of Consul Conor's outstanding son, and assumed that Roboute was one of the missing Primarchs. The Lord of Mankind rushed to meet his son, but a warp storm blew his ship off course, and the expedition did not arrive on Macraig until 5 years after Guilliman was declared unanimous ruler. The Emperor saw an ideal human world flourishing under the wing of a charismatic and gifted leader. The Lord of Mankind was impressed by his son's success and entrusted him with the 13th Legion of Space Troopers, which later became the standard of Astartes warriors. Under the Primarch's leadership, the Ultramarines became the most strategically gifted and tactically balanced legion of all others. Learning battle theory and putting it into practice, The Ultramarines fought with exceptional efficiency, quickly and decisively destroying any enemy. The Ultramarines' legion was second only to the Lunar Wolves in the number of worlds brought into alignment with the Imperium. However, once he conquered a planet, Guilliman did not leave until he had established a stable system of government. He would form a new government loyal to the Emperor and leave wise advisors to develop industry and logistics, integrating the acquired world into the Imperium system. Guilliman's primary concern was the welfare of the people. But despite his long-distance expeditions, he did not forget to take care of Macragge and its neighbouring worlds. Roboute had created an effective mobilization system in his home system, ensuring that the Ultramarines had a constant flow of new recruits. This and minimal battle losses due to competent leadership made the Ultramarine Legion the most numerous in the cosmos. The 500 worlds of Ultramar had always held a special place in Guilliman's heart. Sometimes he pondered what he might have become had the Emperor not found him, and what the fate of his homeland would have been had he not been forced to leave his home. During the Horus Heresy, realizing how much support Terra would receive from the Ultramarine forces, Horus tricked the 13th Legion into sending them to the Viridia system, where the legendary Battle of Calth took place. The attack on this planet was to be the first strike in a campaign by the Wordbearers, seeking revenge for the destruction of the monarchy, perpetrated by Roboute at the Emperor's behest many years before. A millennium later, Premac blamed himself for the destruction of Lorgar's favourite city. He admitted that, despite his fanatical brother's certainty that he had fallen victim to his delusions much earlier than the tragedy on Kur, in Guilliman's opinion, it was the fury of the Ultramarine troops on the last day of the monarchy that had pushed the Wardbearers into the hands of chaos. He blamed himself for starting the war that had returned the galaxy to the abyss. Although Roboute Guilliman did not possess the gift of foresight like Sanguinius or Conrad Kurtz, he was certain he could have calculated the possible consequences of the destruction of the 17th Legion and its Primarch. Yet it did not happen, and the monarchy was exterminated. The Wardbearers, backed by the Eaters of Worlds, came to Calth for a mad reckoning. The unexpected attack from the former allies turned into a bloody battle with many casualties. However, Guilliman later attributed much of the damage in that battle to his intemperance. His brother's treachery had infuriated him, and his anger once again prevented him from following a wise plan. The Wordbearers acted under the leadership of Corferon, who, using a cursed sword, atom-wounded Roboute Guilliman in an attempt to defile, just as Ereb had done to Horus. But the avenging son of the Emperor ripped out one of the hearts of the first captain of the 17th Legion, demonstrating his immunity to the temptations of chaos. The Ultramarines proved their deadly effectiveness, crushing the forces of the traitors. Faced with the horrors of his former brothers, Roboute Guilliman, loyal to the Emperor, finally allowed his legion to violate the Edict of Nicaea and authorized the use of psychic powers by the Bibliarians. Through strict adherence to battle doctrine, proper planning and bravery, the 13th Legion victoriously completed the battle in short order and set out to defend their homeworld. But the wounds inflicted on those who were considered brothers forever left a dark shadow over all the sons of Guilliman, dividing the Ultramarines into those who fought at Calth and those who escaped that battle. The Primarch made no insignia of honor for the veterans of those battles. However, the betrayal they endured invisibly set these troopers apart from the rest. Like those who returned from the massacre on Istvan, the Ultramarines will carry the mark of treacherous treachery in their souls for the rest of their lives. The legacy of this tragedy would echo sadly in subsequent wars, when the precautions taken by the 13th Legion would sometimes seem paranoid. But the attack on Calth was not the only foulness of the Wordbearers. With their black sorcery, the fanatics tore space apart with warp storms, cutting off many planets from the light of the Imperium. Ultramar, like the others, became isolated. The disappearance of the Emperor's psychic beacon was seen as the likely demise of his father and the throne world. Guilliman endured the pain of possible loss with dignity, gathering all his prudence to make decisions at this critical moment. He concluded, even if the Emperor is dead, he must have destroyed a large number of traitorous forces, which means the treacherous brothers are weakened and unable to fully usurp power. The battle for the Imperium is not yet over. To avenge and save the galaxy, it is necessary to mobilize all possible forces and build a new pillar for the kingdom of mankind. Roboute Guilliman has put his grandiose plan into action and established an extremely safe and secure stronghold for our loyal forces, naming it Imperium Secundus. The young kingdom that emerged was intended by the father of the Ultramarines to be a haven and safe harbor for the troops that remained loyal to the Imperium. Soon Sanguinius and Lion L. Johnson joined the Imperium Secundus along with his legions. As soon as the first news of the Horus heresy reached Macragge, Roboute immediately moved his forces to the defense of Macragge's homeworld. Despite proper planning and a hasty launch at top speed, the Primarch was too late. He had the most powerful legion in the galaxy and the most impeccable tactical potential, and yet, for the second time in his life, he failed to arrive in time to help his father. The Word-Bearer's sorcery that ripped through space gave no chance to save the future of the Imperium. The approach of the Ultramarines' fleet was instrumental in the outcome of the Horus heresy. It was what forced the forces of Horus to force events and lower the Void Shields, inviting the Emperor to fight. Nevertheless, the outcome of the tragedy on Vengeful Spirit cannot be called positive. Heresy ravaged the galaxy, destroying a significant portion of the Legiones Astartes and desecrating another portion with chaos. But the 13th Legion, thanks to the wisdom of Roboute Guilliman, retained its status as the most numerous legion. Guilliman assumed the position of Lord Commander and for several years after the Arch-Traitors' rebellion ruled the armed forces, effectively halting the collapse of the Imperium. During this period, Guilliman published his famous work, the Codex Astartes. This battle doctrine he developed included not only recommendations on how to divide legions, but also gathered within its pages the wisdom of many warriors who had experienced various tactical circumstances. Over the millennia, many Space Marine chapters have revered the Codex Astartes as a sacred text and followed it rigorously. Among the Ultramarines, it was customary to memorize entire chapters of the Codex by heart, so that a company of space troopers could reproduce the full text of this crucial document at any time. In creating the Codex Astartes, Guilliman drew on his recent experience in suppressing the betrayal of his brothers. He concluded that treachery was an unchangeable part of human nature, and thus the only reasonable solution was to limit the power concentrated in a single hand. However, millennia later, Guilliman would come to the conclusion that the Codex Astartes was not without flaws and would decide to rewrite it. According to the father of the Ultramarines, while working on the doctrine of the Codex Astartes, he had focused all his attention on the part devoted to the reform of the legions, leaving many chapters to the council created by his father. So after revising all parts of the work, Guilliman decided to rewrite it, giving the text a new name, Codex Imperialis. The updated doctrine promised to speak of the good governance that the Empire lacked in the 41st millennium. With the end of the Horus heresy, legions of traitors retreated to the Eye of Terror, and loyal forces cleared territories of renegade forces. The Alpha Legion, in the Eye, however, but moved to the east of the galaxy, pursuing their own goals. Did they include a battle with the Ultramarines? It is unknown, but it did occur. The last encounter that ended in battle was between Alfarius and Guilliman on the planet Escrador. Alfarius assumed that the creator of the Codex Astartes would follow his tactics as outlined in the doctrine, so he was surprised by the Ultramarines' unexpected maneuvers. Roboute Guilliman, against his own rules, separated from the main force with a small group of troopers and struck at the Alpha Legion's central headquarters. This move pleased Alfarius, who took advantage of the moment to demonstrate how flexible and varied his troops could be, which made them stand out against the methodical and tactically monotonous Ultramarines. Guilliman and the Alpha Legion commander clashed in battle, and, as a result of the conflict, Alfarius fell at Guilliman's hands. However, the battle did not end there. Contrary to the Ultramarines' assumptions, the decapitated Hydra did not cease to be dangerous. The Alpha Legion struck back with a crushing retaliation of such force that it almost completely wiped out the loyalists involved in the battle. After a week of heavy fighting and heavy losses, the Ultramarines found a way to group up and evacuate the planet. The Legion, without their commander, won a convincing victory over Roboute Guilliman's forces, leaving questions as to whether the defeated man was really Alfarius. Still, whoever it was, he was merely a human, albeit one who had found himself on the side of chaos, but not endowed with its monstrous power. The battle with the other fallen brother, Fulgrim, however, proved to be quite different, and Guilliman, even before this battle began to make mistakes unacceptable for a brilliant strategist. Understanding his own battle doctrines, Guilliman was aware of his every act that went against competent action. But anger blinded his mind, forcing him to rush to meet his fate. Convinced that acting against the code of Astartes would catch Fulgrim off guard, but it did not. Like Horus, Slaanesh Demon Prince lowered the shields on his flagship, luring his angry brother onto the Emperor's pride. The journey through the once majestic ship itself was the first blow for Guilliman. Walking through the mangled corridors, Guilliman could not push away the memories of times past, when Fulgrim had welcomed him warmly into a beautiful hall filled with cheering children of the Emperor. Guilliman was oppressed by thoughts of how history might have turned out if his brother had not fallen. Emotions made Roboute ignore the advice of his commanders as well as his own code. Against his better judgment, the Primarch travelled alone to the hall where the demon Prince Fulgrim awaited him. Guilliman and Fulgrim had been unfriendly even before the heresy, and Guilliman had always thought Fulgrim a narcissistic, prideful man. Nevertheless, he could not hold back tears when he saw what the Emperor's former son had become. However, Fulgrim, though transformed into a demonic being, retained his familiar face and did not notice the tragedy in what had happened. On the contrary, the demon prince mocked Guilliman, extolling the virtues of his new lord and reminding him of all of Roboute's lapses in the defense of the Imperium that had wounded the soul of the Primarch loyal to the Emperor. Even at this moment, Guilliman realized his mistake and the need to retreat to save himself. He clearly realized that this day would go down in the list of his failures committed due to irrational anger. And yet, he went into battle with an obviously more powerful opponent. Armed with 4 swords at once, Fulgrim delivered a fatal blow, striking the throat of the shocked Guilliman. Despite his superiority, the demon prince, looking at the bleeding Guilliman, explained that he was able to strike with such precision because he saw the mark of the cursed blade on Guilliman's neck, which belonged to Corfarion, captain of the Word-Bearers. According to Fulgrim, the marks on his former brother's neck were imprinted in the warp and were a vulnerable spot. Even Roboute Guilliman's enhanced physiology could not handle the poison of Fulgrim's demonic sword. Realizing his own death was approaching, the Primarch of the 13th Legion cried out to his father, the Emperor, asking who would now lead humanity. Even on the brink of death, he thought only of the fate of the Imperium and its people. The loyal Ultramarines warriors did everything in their power to save their Lord Commander. Breaking into the battle, they evacuated the wounded Guilliman to the ship, where skillful apothecaries placed him in a stasis field. The Legion delivered his genetic father to his home planet of Macragge, where he sat on a marble throne for 10,000 years. The fortress of Hera, which contained the famous hall with the frozen Primarch all those years ago, was considered the most revered place in the Imperium after the throne room of the Imperial Palace. There were rumors among the religious pilgrims that Guilliman's wound was slowly healing, and that the Emperor's great son would soon awaken to once again stand in defense of humanity. However, Roboute Guilliman remained unmoved despite the trials that had befallen the Ultramar system. Over the millennia, the structure Guilliman had created surrounding the Macragge had fallen into disrepair. Many worlds declared independence, some degraded to the point where ordinary people were once again reduced to poverty and slavery. Ultramar experienced clashes with Orcs and Tau, and some planets awakened Necrons, but the most devastating was the Tyrannid invasion of Macragge. thanks to the military valor and competent actions of the Ultramarines, managed to clear the world of the Xenos and destroy their remnants on neighboring planets. However, the capital of the system was turned into ruins and remained destroyed for many years. But even this was not the greatest of troubles to befall the Guilliman homeworld when the 13th Black Crusade of Abaddon the Despoiler descended upon Ultramar at the end of the 41st millennium. The treacherous son of the Arch-Predator ravaged the galaxy, leading his own legion of various groups of traitorous forces. However, he was brought to Ultramar by information that Belisarius Cole had delivered a relic to Macragge that could change the course of the Long War and prevent the triumph of chaos. For centuries, under the orders of Roboute, Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Cole worked on the grand project of creating Primaris. In addition to this, the powerful techno-genius was engaged in other tasks, traveling the galaxy in search of the necessary resources for his work. Cole thoughtlessly discarded any preconceptions that might interfere with the process. In the Cadian system, while studying the Necron pylons, Belisarius even began working with Trazyn the Infinite. Together, they even attempted to activate ancient Xenos technology. However, Abaddon still destroyed Cadia, and with it, the Necron pylons. A tremendous rift erupted from the western to eastern edge of the Imperium. Ironically, the planet where the sprouts of corruption had previously touched the Emperor's first fallen sun became the epicenter of an impenetrable warp storm that sliced the galaxy in half. Belisarius Cole escaped from the collapsing planet with the help of the Eldar, who transported the survivors through the web to Ultramar. However, the Xenos race was undergoing a massive upheaval at the time. The Aeneid, the elder god of the dead, had awakened, and the Inari, who accompanied the Archmagos, turned out to be followers of the new deity, truly believing in its power. Among the Xenos who arrived on Macragge was a member of the key triumvirate of the god of the dead, Yvraine, his messenger and the last hope of the Eldar. Finding himself face-to-face with Kalgar, the acting lord of the planet, Belisarius Cole told that even before the fateful battle with Fulgrim, Roboute Guilliman had assigned the techno-priest an extremely important task: to find a way to revive him. The story proved so suspicious that the Ultramarines agreed to allow the arrivals only after the Legion's chief bibliarch, Tigurius, reported visions prophesying Guilliman's rebirth. While the forces of chaos attacked Macragge from all sides, Belisarius set about the task at hand, but as soon as he began work on Guilliman's body, the Black Legion focused all their efforts on the fortress of Hera, where the sacred stasis pod was located. It was then that Yvraine called upon her patron Aeneid for help. The Eldar god's power over life and death, combined with the secret technology of Belisarius Cole, released Roboute Guilliman from a long sleep of 10,000 years. In front of a stunned crowd, the fully healed Primarch awakened and rushed into battle without delay. His immense power swept away a sizable force of attackers, and the Ultramarines, galvanized by the return of their father, finally drove the forces of chaos from the planet. In triumph, Roboute once again led the Macragge and the Ultramarines. At the ceremony marking Guilliman's ascension to the throne, he gave an inspiring speech, confirming his abilities as an orator. Marneus Calgar was happy to yield his post to his resurrected father, who declared his intentions to reclaim the separated worlds that were once in the realm of Ultramar. It was decided to end the grand parade by presenting Roboute with a golden laurel wreath, so that the Picts scattered across the galaxy would inspire those who had lost hope to brave exploits. But when Guilliman put on the precious crown, visions of great accomplishments and glittering triumphs swept over his mind, paling in comparison to all he had accomplished in the past. The exciting future promised heroic victories and power comparable only to that of an emperor. Realizing the sacrilege of these thoughts, he threw off the defiled wreath, proving once again his invulnerability to the temptations of chaos. The crown was a gift from Fulgrim, who had learned of the return of the brother he had once defeated. The Phoenixian's poisonous whisper haunted Guilliman, foretelling only disappointment and temptation ahead. Roboute didn't believe a word of it, and yet the voice of his fallen brother haunted him for days. Within 7 months, the system was completely cleansed of the foulness of chaos, and the friendly Xenos left Macragge with the Primarch's respectful blessing. But the realm of men was no longer like what the avenging son had given his life for. Fanatical cultists had made a god out of his father. As soon as he saw what the Imperium had become, Roboute thought that the rotting hulk of a civilization, driven not by reason and hope, but by fear and ignorance, was so repugnant that he would rather burn in the fires of Horus's ambition and the galaxy than continue to exist in such a world. Pain and superstition had become the norm for ordinary people, and the mad religion that had perverted every aspect of human existence was being used by the Inquisition to exterminate anyone who dared to think otherwise. In this millennium, it was as if prudence no longer existed. The most familiar things, like flying cherubic servitors, disgusted the Primarch. He hated the art and hated the time in which he now lived. But the first wave of anger that had come over Guilliman so easily had subsided. Whatever these people had become, he had to save them. The Emperor was uncompromising in his fight against all beliefs, and he had no interest in where religious madness came from in people's hearts. But Roboute saw the nightmarish world around him, demonic hordes and a hopeless future for any slave living in the lower floors of the hives. The heresy of Horus had destroyed any chance of fulfilling the dream of prosperity and freedom for humanity, and the only beacon of light in desperate souls was faith in the Emperor as a god. Faith-based madness, however, was repugnant to Guilliman. Still, after several encounters with the Inquisition, Guilliman, unafraid to confront the cult, chose not to refuse to cooperate with it. Guilliman decided to first overcome all the existing external problems and then turn to the spiritual sphere of civilization. As always, he thought first of the welfare of the people. The first step towards this was what would later be called the Terran Crusade. Guilliman intended to meet his father. However, Magnus the Red, who was advancing on Fenris at the time with his sorcery, raised raging storms in the warp that drew the ultramarine fleet into its maelstroms. The poisoned currents hurled the ships against the demon worlds, causing catastrophic casualties and causing Guilliman frustration and guilt. Hope for salvation came again from the Eldar when the Eldred seer Ulthran offered to help the ultramarines. The Eldar sent Roboute Guilliman a psychic message with instructions to successfully enter real space. But when the warp-torn Ultramarines' ships almost reached their destination, they were stopped by a giant chaos fleet led by the greatest demon of Tzeentch, known as the Kairos Fateweaver. The servant of the Architect of Fate captivated Guilliman, binding him with chains created from the Primarch's oppressive emotions, and after threatening his life, forced the surviving Ultramarines to surrender. His plans to imprison Guilliman forever in a black stone fortress did not come to pass. The Eldar Harlequins rescued Guilliman and the remaining warriors by transporting them across the web to the moon. Once on Terra's satellite, the Crusade faced Magnus the Red and his 1,000 sons, preparing to attack the throne world. Victory over the treacherous Magnus was won by Guilliman with the support of the Imperial Fists, the Sisters of Silence, and the Eldar. After many trials, Guilliman finally reached the Imperial Palace. The meeting with his father, the Emperor, lasted only a few seconds, but Roboute seemed like days. The terrifying majesty of the Emperor knocked Guilliman off his feet, but an outside observer would not have noticed it. He was blinded by light and fury, a soul-scorching radiance and an endless sound that filled eternity. On the golden throne sat a decaying corpse, and yet it was a majestic king of infinite power. He wasn't dead, he was stronger than ever before. The Lord sat on the throne to think, and absolutely, when this meditation was over, he would rise and rule justly. The horrible and monumental creature only paid attention to him after Guilliman called his father. Before him stood the embodiment of power, destiny and future, framed by the past, despair and degradation. This being was not just a father, it was something more, not just a name but a symbol, an instrument of creation. Scalding words pierced Guilliman's mind. The creature on the throne was not a joyous father welcoming his son. It was more like a living star, an evil, colossal force, too busy fighting the great forces of chaos. And yet, as he left this strange hall, Guilliman realized how he should proceed, though the disturbing memories of that encounter long continued to plague him, reminding him of the pain he had experienced. The Primarch announced that he was assuming the mantle of Lord Commander of the Imperium and assembling the greatest army to finally defeat chaos and revive the lost dream of a happy future for humanity. One of the key weapons for the new war were the Primaris warriors, created by Belisarius Cole at the behest of Roboute Guilliman. These warriors were faster and stronger than their predecessors. Equipped with the latest armor and weapons, the upgraded troopers became a decisive force, greatly strengthening the position of the loyalist forces in the galaxy. Their effectiveness was first demonstrated during the Second Battle for Terra, when the blood god Khorne, eager to demonstrate his superiority, sent 88 demonic cohorts to storm the Imperial Palace. After successfully defending the throne world, Guilliman led the crusade, uniting the Sisters of Silence, Primaris Space Marines, and many chapters of Adeptus Astartes. Moving towards planets plagued by chaos, the Primarch sought to cleanse the tainted galaxy. After liberating another world, Guilliman would give orders to begin supplying needed aid to the civilians. Food, water, medical supplies and warriors were sent to the planet to maintain order. The rational and merciful actions seemed like an act of magnanimity in the eyes of mortals, reinforcing Guilliman's image as a divine son of the Emperor, though it only irritated the Primarch. All decisive steps of the Lord Commander of the Imperium were now accompanied by gestures necessary for the new reality. For the new campaign, Guilliman invited an ecclesiarchy priest chosen by him personally. Although Guilliman still had a negative view of religion in the Imperium, he hoped to benefit from favorable interactions with the ministers of the cult. Even the intelligent Ultramarines, who claimed to regard the Emperor as an eminent man, rather than a god, fell into a holy awe in Guilliman's presence, which meant that it was useless to stand alone against a civilization gripped by madness. Guilliman had only to curb this civilization and steer it in a favorable path. Nevertheless, he did take the necessary steps to implement plans to bring the Imperium back to sanity. He created the Logos Historica Verita, an organization whose primary goal was to restore the true history the Primarch had missed during the 10,000 years of his sleep. The Inquisition altered and deleted events from the archives as it saw fit, leaving only what was not out of the political mainstream. Mining true historical knowledge in the 41st millennium was no easy task. Determining even the exact year of his awakening proved difficult. After all, many things, including the calendar created by the Emperor, had been changed, and it seemed almost impossible to find out the chronology of events in order to understand the reasons for what had happened. But Guilliman did not give up. To work in the created organization, he attracted a lot of inquisitive employees, many of whom he personally trained. Most of these people were saved by him from the Inquisition's bonfire and gratefully carried out the missions he received. The chief scholar of the organization was Guilliman himself. In his spare moments, he secluded himself in his scriptorium, working for the good of humanity, realizing that his struggle was now focused on the survival of the species rather than its development. There was no longer a single moment of inactivity in the Primarch's life. The death that had consumed him for 10,000 years had left its mark. He could no longer sleep. The apothecaries could not explain this phenomenon, which bothered Roboute himself little. He believed that the long years in stasis had given him ample time to rest. During the years of his absence, almost everyone who knew him personally had passed away, so no one could notice how much Guilliman had changed. His aristocratic face was covered with dozens of wrinkles, his golden hair had thinned, grey on his temples and dark circles under his eyes. He was still a magnificent creation of the Emperor, but his beauty was fading under the weight of his worries. In addition, ever since the resurrection, Guilliman had been haunted by pain that he held back by the occasional clenching of his jaw. Fulgrim's wound had not gone away, and the relentless physical pain was sometimes joined by what Roboute called emotional pain. He refused to recognize his torment as spiritual, rejecting the idea that the traitorous sword could have wounded not only his body, but his soul as well. Roboute Guilliman worked to exhaustion, realizing his role as the only savior of mankind. Yet every person has a limit, especially if the entire galaxy considers him a demigod. Despite Guilliman's patronage, the activities of the Logos Historica Verita were extremely risky. Divided into small secret cells, the organization's research teams traveled the galaxy in search of the necessary sources. The main part, located on Macragge, systematized and compared the information received, trying to piece together the real history of the Imperium. So Yassili Suleimania, one of the free traders in the Logos Historica Verita, delivered to Guilliman an ancient book, all copies of which he himself ordered to be destroyed 10,000 years ago. Then not one iota changed the negative attitude towards the Religi Primarch. Still read Lectitio Divinitatus. He bitterly reflected that imperial truth turned into a deception, and thanks to the heresy of the Chorus, the whole galaxy learned about it. But at the same time, the false creations of Lorgar that started all this madness was the foundation for the existing cult that does not allow Imperium to disintegrate. The irresistible crusade lasted about 12 years, during which many worlds returned to a peaceful life. Among the predicted was Baal, the hometown of Sanguinia, attacked by the Tyranids. Having solemnly completed the campaign, Guilliman was forced to return to Ultramar in order to save his kingdom from Nurgle. Prosperous planet systems were beautiful pearls of calm in a burning galaxy. Noticing their beauty, Nurgle wished to convert these worlds and make them part of his garden. At first, seeds of spoilage were sent to the selected planets, causing numerous diseases and mowing down millions of inhabitants of Ultramar. From the bodies of the fallen, according to the plan of the Lord of Decay, his demons appeared outside, and among the remnants of the survivors, cults of spoilage began to emerge, calling even more powerful servants of Nurgle. 3 worlds in the north of Ultramar completely passed into the possession of chaos, taking the name Scourge Stars. Under the guidance of the best commanders of the God Plague, these worlds became bases of enemy forces. The military invasion began the Death Guard under the anticipation of the fallen Primarch Mortarion. According to his multi-stage plan, Ultramar was waiting for disasters, the first of which was War of Flies, which destroyed worlds with viral bombing and finished off the survivors with the forces of that damned Legion. Slowly but inexorably, the damage spread. The raging warp of the storm cut off the planets from communication with the Imperium, taking away the opportunity to receive reinforcements. From the last force, the defenders of Ultramar held the defense in hundreds of places on the day when Guilliman returned to the native system. The appearance of Lord Commander deprived traitors of a tactical advantage. All attacks by the Chaos Forces began to successfully fight back. However, 2 other military commanders of Nurgle entered the war, Kugath, Plaguefather, and Typhus. Attacks began to occur more and more often and further from each other, and it became almost impossible to restrain them. It was possible to take over at this stage only after the arrival of support from the Forge Worlds and several orders of ultramarine heirs. Guilliman fought on equal terms with the demonic brother Mortarion before he retreated after his own Death Guard. By order of the Lord Commander of the Imperium, wounded soldiers were taken to the planet transformed into an infirmary. Doctors fought for every life, resorting to euthanasia only as a last resort. In the homeland of the Primarch, they said that in such features, the difference between the Emperor and the father of the Ultramarines is most clearly traced. The tangible concern of Guilliman was a source of courage for the exhausted people. A landmark event that occurred during the first half of the Plague Wars was an unexpected manifestation of the power of the Emperor. The priest of Ecclesiarchy, chosen by the Primarch during a trip through the warp, saw a dream where the ruler of mankind turned to the mortal with an order to find a certain girl who was destined to be the key to victory over the forces of Nurgle. The blindly believing priest failed to convince the Primarch, and the found child, despite the obvious mental strength, was taken into custody. Guilliman feared that the girl, albeit clearing some territory of foul, could be a puppet of Magnus, also at odds with Mortarion, and not at all a vessel of the will of the ruler of mankind. Odnakov's belief in the god of the Emperor in some warriors guarding the mysterious girl was stronger than devotion to the Primarch. The priest who took advantage of this persuaded the Sisters of Battle, convinced that they were fulfilling the will of the Emperor to bring the girl out of prison on the battlefield. He hoped that having seen her grace, the Primarch would finally accept his father's divinity. Fulfilling the plan, the Sisters of Battle took the lives of several child guards, including even the Primaris, and the girl, filled with power, despite the blocking Saka abilities of the Shackle and the presence of the Pariah, contributed to her release. The body of the mortal child was destroyed by the influence of the strength that filled it, and by the time Guilliman saw her, there were no eyes or lips on the child's face. The immeasurable power scorched the vessel that enclosed itself. Her appearance in the battle led both Imperial warriors and demons, and after that it forced the treacherous army to retreat. For the priest of ecclesiarchy, all this was undeniable evidence of the appearance of the divine emperor. But Primarch could not so easily succumb to religious delight. After the battle, Guilliman ordered the execution of the sister of the battle for treason, while the priest who sabotaged suffered only a formidable suggestion that could not sober the fanatic. Wars with the followers of Nurgle did not end there. Purging world after world, Imperium's forces under Guilliman eventually found themselves in a final battle at the very doorstep of the Lord of Decay's mansion. He did not show, but certainly watched as the Emperor's two sons, Roboute and Mortarion, were going to fight in a decisive duel. Remembering the previous unsuccessful clashes, the Demon Prince used the trick corresponding to his cult, poisoned the Primarch of the Ultramarines with an incredible poisonous disease created specifically for this purpose. Mortarion was filled with the mighty forces of chaos and first knocked Guilliman to the ground and then plunged into him a poisoned syringe filled with deadly chemicals capable of destroying both Primarchs. Toxins ate away at Guilliman's body, and fumes from the poison killed others. Both spaceports and demons, even Mortarion, was forced to create a dome of mental power around him to defend himself against the spreading death. This monstrous procedure was supposed to drag the soul of the avenging sun into the kingdom of Nurgle, contributing to the immersion of all Ultramar in the warp. Watching the torment of his brother, Mortarion persuaded him to surrender and join the service of the true god. But Guilliman remained adamant, resisting the temptations of chaos. Suffering from a painful and slow death, Guilliman recalled his last meeting with the Emperor, praying for his help in saving mankind. The body of the Primarch charred, and his armor turned into rusty debris, but the thought of the father did not leave him. Then the Emperor responded. The corpse-like remains of Guilliman soared upward. His body and armor were tremendously restored. Frightened demons rushed away. The earth shook from the ringing of invisible bells. In front of Mortarion, the former brother gained impossible power. A powerful entity with eyes pouring out shining descendants spoke in Guilliman's voice. Stunned by what he saw, Mortarion thought he saw his father in front of him, but the creature refused to accept this appeal. It was Roboute Guilliman, the avenging son and defender of the Imperium, saved by the power of the Emperor. The traitor, defeated by doubts, retreated and was immediately dragged into the opened portal into the possession of the Plague God. The planet was cleared, demonic forces disappeared after their leader. Clear skies appeared among the scattered poisonous clouds. Guilliman came to his senses, kneeling in the middle of the heated earth. The incredible temperature turned everything around into glass, but the primate itself remained untouched. He remembered everything that happened, but did not want to reflect on the essence that appeared no matter what entered into his soul. It had already disappeared. Witnesses of the event are likely to see this as another proof of divinity Guillimana. But who is not a fanatic in such dark times? After a while, reflecting on the phenomenon of colossal power that pulled him out of the clutches of disgusting death, Guilliman spoke about the mechanical imprint of Belisarius Cole's consciousness that had occurred. The Primarch cautiously expressed suspicions that the Emperor was awakening, increasingly showing his strength. Tarot, living saints, a girl burned from his power, and finally the salvation of the Primarch pointed to this. These dubious thoughts worried Guilliman, and he forced the machine endowed with part of the consciousness of Archimagos Dominus to answer the question, can the Emperor rise like Guilliman himself? The artificial mind tried to evade the answer, but was forced to obey a direct order. He gave Guilliman advice, recommending that he not seek an opportunity to revive the Emperor, since he was no longer the one who entered the throne room. His resurrection. According to Belisarius, the Imperium would have led to hell, paved with good intentions. After all, the gods, no matter how they call themselves, this is a desecration of existence. So the Ka thought Imperial truth still aroused conflicting feelings in the soul of the Primarch. He tried to remain faithful to her, but could not forget that most of it was based on lies. At the same time, religion, or what claims to be it, protects people from fears and souls from despair. Many hours of dialectical disputes with himself about the possible divinity of the Emperor led Roboute to the conclusion that his Sitna in this matter does not matter. After all, everything he does is aimed at protecting people. Millennia ago, his father lied about the true essence of the warp for the protection of humanity. And now Guilliman, leading the Imperium in his place, continued this lie, speaking from the rostrum that God the Emperor loves his admirers.